The topic for today is why the Irish support Palestinians and Palestine. So this is obviously something that is unfolding in front of our eyes right now. If you're glued to the news, sometimes you have to dig a little bit to find even the term Palestine in the news. We often recognize that this population is often silenced, it's often forgotten, and it's often neglected. The reason why this talk actually came about, we were holding an event the other night at Rice University, which is where I teach, and a young Muslim in the MSA put his hand up and he said, "Why do only Muslims support Palestinians?" And I kind of had to stop him real quick and I said, "You must know about the Irish's support for the Palestinians." Now, the reason why this support is so strong is largely due to... Is there a little echo? Little? The reason why this support is so strong is largely due to the historic similarities between the Irish struggle and the Palestinian struggle. So what I want to do with you this evening for the next 30 minutes, I'm going to do my best to get through what I want to get through in 30 minutes. But I want to bring you on a little historical journey, starting in the late 1500s in Ireland. And I'm going to bring you up to the current time. And as you can see, I have my computer. I rarely speak with a computer or notes, but for this talk, it's going to be important for me to actually read you some of these historical moments, some dates, some statistics, and some laws that have been enacted. So the talk is going to focus around maybe 5, definitely 4 main themes. And again, these themes are what links the Irish struggle and the Palestinian struggle together. The first concept is going to be settler colonialism. The second concept, and it's related to settler colonialism, is ethnic cleansing. The third theme is going to be demonization or dehumanizing a group of people. The fourth is going to look at institutionalized racial and religious bigotry. And if I have time, I want to talk about hunger strikes, which is a form of protest that Irish prisoners have historically used to push back against blatant oppression from England. And we also see many Palestinian prisoners today who are locked up doing the same. Let me first begin, before we dive into the history, I want to talk to you a little bit about what's happening right now. In December of 2018, so not too long ago, the Jerusalem Post reported that Shenad Éireann. Shenad Éireann is an Irish word. Essentially, it's the equivalent of the Irish Senate. And they approved a bill to criminalize all goods bought from the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights settlement activities. This is popularly referred to as boycott, divestment, and sanctions, the BDS movement. So the Irish Senate has said that they are not going to import any goods from these occupied territories because these settlements in the occupied territories are illegal under international law. Once Shenad Éireann passed it, it went down to the lower house. So the way it works in Ireland is a bit different. It starts with the Senate and then it goes to the House. But the Dáil Éireann also approved of this bill, which is formally known as the Control of Economic Activity Bill, but it's now popularly referred to as the Occupied Territory Bills. Israel was not too happy about this. In January of 2019, it summoned the Irish ambassador over the passing of this BDS bill. My alma mater, so I lived in Ireland for 5 years when I was doing my PhD. I went to Trinity College in Dublin. If you've been to Dublin, you're probably familiar with Trinity College. In March 2018, students at Trinity College voted to support the BDS movement as well, meaning that the Students' Union at Trinity supported the movement and, quote, complied with the principles of the BDS in all of its union shops, in its trade, in its business, and all other union operations. And another university, Dublin City University, that student union just a couple days ago also passed the BDS law in an overwhelming capacity. It was something like 80% of the student body passed it. So we clearly have a lot of support in Ireland. Now, this is interesting because it wasn't always this way. In the 1920s and the 1930s, Ireland and Irish nationalists actually sympathized with the Zionist movement, which is a lot different from the current narratives. And the reason why this connection was there is because the Irish knew that the Jewish people also had a historic suffering. And as you know, in this country, there are loads of people of Irish descent, myself included. A lot of our ancestors did not want to leave Ireland. They were forced out for various reasons, which I'm going to get over. So in the 20s and 30s, Ireland sympathized with this idea of having a homeland. But things changed when the Zionist movement really picked up and the British Mandate came about. The British Mandate, for those who are not familiar with that, is essentially what created the State of Israel, which I'm going to get into. And when Ireland became partitioned, Ireland is an island today, right? We know that. But it's not a united country. There's two countries on the island. There's the Republic, which is where my family's from, and then there's Northern Ireland, which is where all the troubles have been. And it's largely a Protestant Catholic struggle. So that's when the Irish started realizing that their struggle is not going to be the Zionist struggle because they partitioned the island. In February of 1980, Ireland was the first EU member to call for the establishment of a Palestinian state. So Ireland holds that honor. And it was also the last country in the European Union to allow an Israeli residential embassy. That happened in 1993. Other connections that we see. 2010, if you remember the Gaza-bound flotilla that tried to break the siege of Gaza. This was May 31st, 2010. Israeli commandos invaded the flotilla. One of those flotillas was named the Rachel Corrie. So for those who may not know Rachel Corrie, she was a U.S.-born Irish-American activist, and she was a member of the International Solidarity Movement, which is a pro-Palestinian group. Rachel Corrie was murdered by the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF. She was run over by a bulldozer in Rafah as she was trying to protect the demolition of Palestinian homes. Israeli courts rejected all of the grievances that were brought by people who were allies and sympathetic to Rachel Corrie's cause. And what we see with the Israeli courts, the plight of the Palestinians and the challenge of the Palestinians isn't just happening in the occupied territories. It's not simply Gaza, West Bank, and East Jerusalem. There are Palestinian second-class citizens in Israel that are also facing severe challenges. So that brings us up to date with the current stuff. But now let me go back hundreds and hundreds of years. Settler colonialism. Let me read you a definition of what this is. Settler colonialism, and this is from the BDS website. I highly recommend everyone tonight goes to the BDS website. Settler colonialism is a form of colonialism in which settlers create societies that are distinct from the indigenous population and seek to control land and resources and establish their own economy and system of governance. Since the settler society is primarily concerned with the control of land, it seeks to eliminate or forcibly remove the indigenous population and replace it with members of the settler population. This makes settler colonialism different from other forms of colonialism that may focus on something like just exploiting labor. As a leading academic on the subject of settler colonialism, Patrick Wolf put it, the purpose of settler colonialism is to destroy by replacing. So we are talking about a land issue. People have been brought to a land, I'm talking about the Israelis, by a foreign power. The British Mandate created the State of Israel. Britain allowed that to happen. In doing so, what's happening now, the Palestinians are losing their land. We know that. So when people bring up this idea that Jews and Muslims and Arabs and Jews have always been fighting, and that this conflict that we're seeing now is just a matter of religious differences, you need to push back immediately and remember settler colonialism. This is about land, people being stripped of their land. Now, Irish history. 1556, it's a long, long time ago. We had the first plantations of Ireland. So under the Tudor dynasty in London, in Westminster, you had a royal family that was trying to gain control of not only Britain but Europe. This is following the Protestant Reformation. So Catholics and Protestants were fighting each other. The Tudor dynasty and the Tudor family essentially brought over Protestants to Ireland to settle out of nowhere. In the north of Ireland, which today we understand to be Ulster, it's a province in the north. So they just brought people over to not only push Protestantism, but also to push the English language and to give the English aristocracy more power. The plantation of Ulster was the start of this 400-year experience that the Irish had with colonization. 400 years. As a scholar of this subject, I actually push it back even further to when the Normans actually came to Ireland. So we're looking at 800 years, really, of the British messing around in Ireland. The infamous name is Oliver Cromwell. If you know, I see a lot of heads saying you know him, which is good that you know it, but it's also unfortunate that you know it. He was the Lord Protector of England. He transitioned the British government away from a monarchy into a republic. He was a Puritan Christian, the same type of Christian that founded Plymouth Rock. These were fundamentalist Christians that didn't like anyone that didn't fit into their neat little category of what it meant to be a Christian. So Puritans hated Catholics. Cromwell was a Puritan. In August of 1649, Cromwell brought his army over to Ireland with the intention of subduing a rebellion. And he ended up doing a lot more than that. At the siege of Drogheda, which is a city not too far from Dublin, in September 1649, Cromwell killed 3,500 people after the town's capture, comprising all the men in the area, including civilians and all Roman Catholic priests. He's remembered for slaughtering women and children as well as unarmed captives. Cromwell's agents, so Cromwell ends up going back to England in 1650, but he left his son-in-law, Henry Ireton, to continue the anti-Catholic campaign. They ended up capturing cities like Waterford, Athlone, and eventually Galway, which is in the west of Ireland. When they conquered Galway, it was basically over. Now, what Cromwell had done for all of his soldiers, he guaranteed all of these soldiers money for fighting in the war. When the war was over, Cromwell was bankrupt. So what could he do? What could he do to please his soldiers? I have no money. I'm going to give you land. This is a very, very unfortunate development. August of 1652, the English Parliament passes the Act for Settling Ireland. While the conquered land was being surveyed, the Parliament had to figure out who had to